It was just another quiet afternoon in Ridgeview, California, a small town nestled in the rolling hills outside the bustling Bay Area. At around 2 p.m., the Eagle Ridge Police Department received a 911 call that would set in motion a chilling and bewildering chain of events. The caller was a man named Alex Richardson, who sounded disoriented and panicked. His voice was slurred, as though he had been drinking or was under the influence of something stronger. Between gasps for air and incoherent muttering, Alex claimed that his girlfriend, Emily Parker, had been kidnapped. His story, however, was anything but clear. He described men in wetsuits who had broken into his home, tied him and Emily up, and then taken her away. His tale sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, filled with absurd details of high-tech gadgets and laser pointers. At the police station, the officers who received the call exchanged uneasy glances. They knew they had to respond to the situation, but there was something unsettling about the way Alex spoke. His urgency seemed real, but his words didn't make sense. He was obviously shaken, but was he a victim? Or was something more sinister at play? Without wasting any more time, 2 officers were dispatched immediately to Alex's address. Alex lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Ridgeview, in a 2-story home that, from the outside, seemed perfectly ordinary. When the officers arrived, they were greeted by Alex himself. He opened the door, looking disheveled and out of sorts. His hair was unkempt, his clothes were rumpled, and his eyes were glazed over, as if he had been up all night or was heavily intoxicated. The officers immediately noticed a strong, chemical smell emanating from the house. It wasn't the usual scent of cleaning products. It was something much stronger, almost like a mixture of bleach and industrial cleaners. The officers exchanged looks as they stepped inside. Alex's home, typically a place of refuge, was anything but ordinary. It was a mess, clothes piled on the floor, empty bottles of alcohol scattered across the countertops, and a general air of chaos. But what was most unsettling was the overwhelming smell of cleaning chemicals that seemed to linger in the air like a fog. Trying to make sense of the situation, one of the officers asked Alex what had happened. What was going on? Where was Emily? Alex's response was anything but clear. He launched into a strange, rambling account of men wearing wetsuits breaking into his home, using lasers and high-powered flashlights, and taking Emily away. The officers struggled to follow his story, which was filled with bizarre, disconnected details. Alex mentioned being tied up, his eyes covered by goggles, and the sound of calming music playing through headphones. He claimed the intruders made strange, almost mechanical demands, including taking their banking information. As the officers tried to piece together his account, they noticed a few things that seemed out of place. The house was eerily quiet, with no sign of a struggle, and the chemical smell grew stronger the farther they went into the home. They ventured upstairs to the master bedroom, where the unsettling scene continued. The bed had been stripped of its sheets, except for a single fitted sheet that remained on the mattress. The floor had been vacuumed recently, and there was an odd sense of meticulousness in the way things had been arranged. Then one of the officers noticed something small but alarming, a drop of blood on the bed. The officers' instincts told them this wasn't the scene of a mere kidnapping, it was something far darker. They quickly returned downstairs to question Alex further. At this point, their doubts about his story were growing. He claimed that the kidnappers had taken Emily, but his behavior and the condition of the house raised more questions than answers. Was he covering up a crime? Did he have something to do with her disappearance? Alex, meanwhile, continued to tell his odd story. He described being drugged by the kidnappers, who had used some kind of tranquilizer to make him fall asleep. He said he woke up to find Emily gone, and when he freed himself from his restraints, he immediately called 911. But as the officers listened to him, they began to piece together a much more sinister scenario. It seemed that Alex had been trying to cover his tracks, creating a convoluted alibi to hide what had really happened. The smell of cleaning chemicals suggested he had tried to wipe away evidence, and the blood on the bed was a telling sign that something violent had occurred. Despite Alex's outlandish story, the police knew they had to investigate further. They began a full-scale search for Emily, scouring the Ridgeview area. Dogs were brought in, and volunteers joined the effort to search for any signs of her whereabouts. Meanwhile, Alex was taken into custody for further questioning, and the police began to comb through his life for any answers. The more they dug, the more they realized that Alex had a troubled past, including an emotionally complicated relationship with Emily. Emily had moved to Ridgeview from Boston just the year before to pursue her career as a physical therapist. She had been enthusiastic about her work at Ridgeview Medical Center, and she quickly formed strong connections with her patients and colleagues. But her relationship with Alex had been rocky from the start. They had met the previous summer, and despite an instant connection, their relationship had been fraught with complications. Alex was still emotionally attached to his ex-fiancée, and Emily had caught him texting her, which led to a painful breakup. She had tried to move on, but Alex kept reaching out, and despite her better judgment, Emily had agreed to meet him one last time. The night they met at Alex's house, they talked, but things had taken a strange turn. Emily had brought pizza and hoped for a calm conversation, but instead, Alex seemed to be spiraling. He was desperate to fix things, to win her back. But Emily, though she cared for him, knew deep down that their relationship wasn't going to work. She had already made her decision to end things, but she didn't have the heart to refuse him. She had hoped that by talking, they could find closure, but instead, the night became the beginning of a nightmare neither of them could have predicted. As the investigation progressed, the police grew more suspicious of Alex's version of events. His behavior was erratic, and there were numerous inconsistencies in his story. For one thing, the kidnappers had allegedly demanded banking information, but when police checked the accounts, they found no signs of fraud or withdrawal. The only strange financial activity was Alex's attempt to secure a cash advance for $8,500, an oddly specific amount that Alex had claimed was for a ransom. Meanwhile, the investigation took an even stranger turn when a reporter for the Ridgeview Gazette received an email from the supposed kidnappers. The email contained a recording of Emily's voice reading a news report. The message stated that she was alive, but her calm tone was chilling. She sounded almost indifferent, which raised alarms for the investigators. The most shocking part was that the email had been sent from Alex's own email account. This revelation left the police with more questions than answers. Was Alex involved in the kidnapping, or was he just a victim of a more complex scheme? As the days went on, the investigation began to feel like a twisted game of cat and mouse. The police discovered that the number used by the kidnappers had been traced to a burner phone. With the help of security footage, they identified a man who looked strikingly like Alex purchasing the phone. However, the man was not Alex. He was a former lawyer and Marine named Marcus Wells, whose life had spiraled into chaos. Wells had been watching Alex and Emily for weeks using a drone, and it was this obsessive surveillance that had led him to carry out the kidnapping. By the time the authorities tracked Marcus to a remote cabin in the Sierra Nevadas, the truth about the kidnapping had become even more bizarre. Marcus was arrested, and the investigation revealed the full extent of his delusions. He had been obsessed with Alex and Emily for months, and he had staged the entire kidnapping. He broke into Alex's house, drugged both him and Emily, and then took her away. The strange story Alex had told the police about men in wetsuits and laser pointers was, in fact, based on the reality of his terrifying encounter with Marcus, but with a few details added in due to his disoriented state. Marcus Wells was charged with multiple crimes, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and other offenses related to his mental health issues. His case highlighted the dangers of untreated mental illness and the lengths to which some individuals will go when they lose touch with reality. In the end, Alex and Emily were exonerated, and the truth about what happened was revealed. The investigation was far from over, but the community's fear of an anonymous kidnapper was replaced with the realization that the danger had come from an individual they had never suspected. Marcus was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison, followed by 31 years for state crimes. Meanwhile, Alex and Emily, who had been through an unimaginable ordeal, began to rebuild their lives. They married, had children, and eventually wrote a book about their experience, sharing their story with the world. Victims, from crime victims to suspects, became a bestseller, and their story became a cautionary tale about the power of delusion and the devastating effects of untreated mental illness. It was a case that not only tested the boundaries of the law, but also exposed the fragility of human relationships and the complexity of the human mind. What started as a story of love and betrayal turned into a nightmare of manipulation and deception, and in the end, it was only through the persistence of the police and the bravery of Alex and Emily that the truth was finally uncovered.